Welcome. Today we are going to be talking about Java's optional class. So this is just going to be an introduction to the optional class in Java. We're primarily going to be doing an overview of the optional class. So we're going to look at what is it, why is it useful, and how do we use it. So let's start with what it is. So the optional class is essentially a container object which may or may not contain a non-nullable value. So why is this useful? Well, one of the biggest problems with Java is, even from the day it was created, is the intent of our methods, the intent of our variables is not really clear if we're going to have a value or not. So we have an example here, string name, string getName, and then some method that actually tries to compare a string name equal to our getName, which should return the name. The problem with this is name could be null and throw a null pointer exception at runtime. So just reading the code, we don't know, for instance, if name potentially could contain a null value. So it's very unclear on the intent. So how do we know the name could be null? We don't, because name is just specified as name. Unfortunately, this approach leaves it up to the developer to determine the intent of the variable if it can be null. So we then have to add a lot of null checks within our application. So is name equal to null? Is name not null? And what do we want to do with it? If we don't, then we're going to get runtime exceptions all over the place. And this is where optional comes in. So why is optional useful? So the optional class now gives us the ability to wrap our strings or wrap our variables and wrap our methods with a optional class, which basically implies the intent that our variable or our method could potentially return a null result or a null. But optional in and of itself, it handles the null. So optional basically says, okay, name is optional, meaning name might not have a value. In this particular case, name's not going to return null because the optional class has some methods that handle how we do null pointers or null checks. Same with our methods here. Our optional string, so we create a string, a return type for getName. So again, we're specifying that name may return no result. So it could potentially be blank. But because we're doing optional, we're going to know that we need to handle that null, or we need to at least filter out that null value. So this is going to be a very hands-on driven presentation today. So we've got 4 examples, with the first example being we're going to create an empty optional object. So we're going to look at the basics of optional, how to create the objects, how to check if the optional is empty, and how to check if the optional has a value. Our second example, we're going to go a little bit deeper into the optional methods. We're going to look at how to create an optional object from an object. So we can take that string and actually convert it to an optional. We're also going to look at some of the issues of using the of method, which can't be null. This will throw a null pointer exception. So we'll look at some caveats and things to watch out for of the basics of using some of these simple methods. And then the third piece we're going to look at in the second example is we're going to look at creating an optional with an object that could be null. So we're going to look at converting an object to an optional. We're going to look at some of the issues of how we could get a null pointer exception. And then we're going to look at creating an optional with nullable. So we're actually going to show how to create an optional showing the intent that it could contain nullable values. For our third example, we are going to dive deeper into the optional class and actually start looking at some of the conditional options that we have with the optional class. So we're going to look at how to get our object out of the optional. So we're going to look to see how we can get that string value out of an optional string. We're going to look at comparisons between null checks versus the optional if present method. We're also going to look at the if present or else, which was introduced in Java 9. And then we're going to look at some of the other conditional methods as well, like or else get, or else throws. And with Java 10, they introduced a simplified version of the or else, which just throws no such element exception. And for our last example, example 4, we're going to look at using the stream methods to map our optional objects into their object counterparts. So this could be useful for JPAs, for entities, or just plain old objects. We can also, using the filter method, to actually remove nulls or pull out the specific data that we want from within our option or within our streams. Very useful. And we're also going to look at using multiple filters to pull out specific values. So you can almost look at filter like a where clause in a SQL statement. Very cool with streams. And then lastly, we'll look at the flat map method, which basically allows you to take a flattened list of streams or flattened list of objects and map them out in a flat map option. Any questions or comments?
When is this Java option used?
So Java options is, so as you saw where I was using the streaming there in the last example, when streams were introduced in Java 8, they were introduced through optional. And early on, it wasn't quickly adopted until Java 9 and 10 came out, when they introduced the additional supplement methods to help reduce the overhead. But what it allows for is you can now chain or do method chaining instead of having to do all the nasty if null checks to verify if a particular method or variable potentially can be null. It also implies what the actual intent is of the variable or the method. Basically, if optional is there, that tells you that you need to be conscious that there could potentially be a null value. The value may or may not be instantiated.
Okay, got it.
With that, I'd like to thank everyone for your time. If you'd like to discuss any of these topics further, or if you have any additional topics you would like us to cover, please reach out to us. We're available through email at info@developer.com. You can send us a message on our website, developer.com/contact us. You can find us on YouTube, search for YouTube Developer, or use the Developer tag. We are also available on Vimeo, vimeo.com/developer. Facebook, also facebook.com/developer. Twitter, same, twitter.com/developer. Our goal is making every developer better. Have a great day.